All right, so what we have on the agenda for today is that we are going to continue talking about Microsoft Access. So last week, obviously, we had Halloween, so happy Halloween. But the week before, we did the Access Basics assignment where we introduced you to Access. Today, what I want to do is to do the Chapter 1 assignment from the book, which is going to be the Bavant Publishing Database and Data Objects assignment, which is on pages AC1 to AC55. So the Access Chapter 1, the Access Chapter 1 book. And in the Access Chapter 1, no, the Access Chapter 1 is the Access Chapter 1. Yeah, that's the one. And so if you look on page AC3, it will show you what it is that we're actually going to be doing in class today. We're going to actually be creating two tables. One is going to be the customer table, and the other is going to be the book rep table. And that's what we're going to be producing in class today. And then what we're going to do next week is we're going to do Chapter 2. And Chapter 2 is all about querying the database. So obtaining specific data from the database. And then the week after that, we're going to not do Chapter 3 at all. And instead, we're going to do the material that is covered in Chapter 3, but we're going to use the student database that we created in the Access Basics section, because I find it easier to understand what it is that we're actually covering. So that's kind of the plan, the roadmap for what we're going to do. So the first thing that I'd like you to do is to go ahead and launch Access. And when we launch Access, we are going to be creating a blank database. So again, to create the blank database, we just want to click onto blank desktop database. And then in the file name that we want to use is your name, Bavant Publishing. So I am going to call mine the Branham Mark Bavant Publishing, and that will then create the database.
Where can we put the name?
When you save the file. Okay. So again, the step 1 is to launch Access. Step 2 is to click onto the blank database, and step 3 is to type in your name, Bavant Publishing.
Okay, log on Access and do blank database?
Yes, blank database.
And do what now?
That's it. And the name of the name that we're doing is Bavant Publishing.
Click on create, right?
Yes. So this is on page AC6.
The blank site, the place that there is a new one, yeah? It's a new, we should write our name.
Yes. And then Bavant is the name of it. On page 7, it tells you the warning about naming files. So things that you can't use are question marks, quotation marks, slashes, backslashes, colons, asterisks, bars, greater than, less than. Those are things that you can't put in your name. Last time we talked about the stuff that's on page 8 and 9. So talking about fields and tables and primary keys and the data types. So on page 9, it talks about that short text can be 255 characters or less. Numbers are only numbers. Currency is money, so special kind of number. Date and time, dates and times, they're really a kind of number. The other types, long text allows you to do more than 255. Auto number, yes, no, true, false, on, off, that kind of stuff. OLE objects are fields that can be stored that would be embedded in the table itself. So things like pictures and stuff could be OLE objects. Word documents, that kind of things could be OLE objects. Hyperlinks, attachments, those could also be things that you might want to attach in it. And then calculated. We will talk about calculated fields later on. All right. So the first thing that we want to do is that we want to create our table. And the structure for the book rep table that we are going to be creating is on page 11. So the structure for this is that we're going to be creating a book rep number. We're going to create a last name, a first name, a street, a city, a state, a postal code, a start date, a salary, and a bonus rate. And there are lots of different ways that you can go about creating those fields. The way that the book is telling you to do it is exactly the same way that we created them to begin with in Access Basics. That is, in the table, in the view called the datasheet view. In the datasheet view, where it currently says ID and click to add, this is where one of the places where you can create fields. So one of the ways to create fields would be to click on click to add and click on short text if it's a short text, and click on a number if it's a number field, and so on. The other way of doing it, and in fact, the way that I usually recommend creating a database, is to not do it in the datasheet view. And the reason that I don't recommend that you do it in the datasheet view is because what you are really doing in the datasheet view should be actually entering in the data, looking at the data, organizing the data. That's really what the datasheet view is useful for. And instead, I would recommend modifying and creating your fields actually in the view called the design view. So to create the records, the fields rather, that we are going to be worrying about, rather than creating them in the datasheet view, I'm recommending that we do it in the design view. So to do it in the design view, we just need to change our view from the datasheet view to the design view. Now, when we do that, it's going to say, what is the name of our table? So the name of this table is the book rep table. So I want to type in book REP, so book representative table. So this is the book rep table. And in the book rep table, this is where it'll list all of the fields that I can have in it. And again, if you turn to page 11, it has a listing of what all of those fields are. So the first field name that we want is not called ID, which is what it does by default. And instead, we want to name it the book rep number. So I'm going to type in book rep number. And in the data type, I don't want it to be an auto number. I want it to be short text. So in the drop-down menu, I'm going to choose short text.
How do you do the drop-down menu?
I clicked on the drop-down menu. Right there.
Right there, the button is right there.
Right here.
Oh, okay. didn't hear that.
And when you're in the field, down at the bottom, it will show you the field properties. So I'm going to change my screen a little bit so it's a little bit easier to see this at the same time. So what we have on here is we have our book rep number, short text. And when I changed it to short text, it changed the field properties. And in the field properties, by default, the field property size is 255 characters. That's the default for a short text field. But in this case, they want the short text field to be a field size of 2. So to change that to a field size of 2, where it says field size of 255, I'm going to change that to say field size of 2. The other thing that we want to do on this is that in the description, they want this to say that it's the unique identifier of the book rep. And the third thing that they want us to do is they want us to change what the caption says. So let me show you what they're talking about. So if you're typing, I want you to stop just for a second and I want you to look up on my screen. If I change my view from the design view back to the datasheet view, when I'm in the datasheet view, and I have to save my table because I've made changes to it, so I save my table, the field name says book rep number. Now, what they want is they want the field name to still be called the book rep number, but they want it to be, when you are viewing it, that it doesn't say book rep number, and instead it says BR number. And they want that to be as an alias. So, so in caption, I'm going to say BR and then a space and then the hashtag symbol, which is the symbol for number. So we do BR space and then the hash. And what that does is that if I change my view again, instead of it saying book rep number, it now looks like it says BR number, even though it actually still says book rep number.
What did you put in caption?
BR number, or BR hashtag symbol.
What is the hashtag?
Shift and 3.
Shift and 3.
Mm-hmm. And so the reason for doing this is because in the database, the reference to the field is still going to be book rep number. But on screen, it would display as BR and then hashtag symbol. Question?
The table name?
The table name again is book rep number. Or book rep table, I mean, book rep table. Questions about the book rep number? All right. So the other thing that they want us to have on here is they want us to have a last name. So we'll do last name, and they want this to be short text, and they want this to be 15 field size of 15. So again, instead of a field size of 255, they want this to be a field size of 15. And then they want a first name. And again, this is all on page 11. And they want first name to also be short text. And they want this also to be size 15. And then they want a street. And they want street to be short text and 20. And then they want city to be short text and 20. And then they want state to be short text and 2. And they want postal code.
State 20?
State is 2.
Like
It's on
California.
page 11. Look on page 11.
All right.
Postal code is short text and 5. Oops. 5. And then start date is going to be a date and time field. So to do the date and time field, I need to click onto the drop-down menu where it says data type, and I need to choose data type of date and time. So instead of it being short text or long text or number, they want it to be date and time. So I choose date and time, and that'll then be a date and time. And I don't need to worry about changing anything in the field properties for that. They're just going to be the way that it is. And then they want salary, and salary, they want this to be currency. So I changed this to be currency. And then we want bonus rate, and they want that to be a number,
Sorry, Professor, when you start it, you should put to where?
date and time.
Date and time. Okay,
That's it.
that's it.
Mhm.
Enter.
And then salary is currency, and bonus rate is a number. And the number type is found where it says by default on number, the field size is long integer. But they don't want it to be long integer. Instead, they want us to click onto this drop-down menu right here. And they want us to choose single.
Huh?
And then under format, they want it to be fixed. And under decimal places, they want 2.
Format is fixed.
Yes. Format is fixed and decimal places is 2.
Decimal point is it default value, right?
No, decimal places is 2. Decimal
Oh,
places should be 2.
decimal
Decimal places are
It's
2.
a separate field, right?
Mhm. And once I've entered in all of my fields, if I go on view and I go back to data sheet and I say yes,
Data view or data
it
sheet?
will change the view to the data sheet view. And you'll notice that it's generated then the fields in at the top. The fields have been entered at the top. And this is exactly the same as the data styles that they have talked about on pages 12 through 15.
Why don't they teach it that way? Being simpler.
It is simpler, and I don't think they should be. I don't think people should be using the design view to do this. I don't. I mean the data sheet view to do it. I think you should only use the design view. So my answer is I don't know why Microsoft recommends that you do it that way, because I think it's a bad choice.
Things like this has less mistakes.
Not only does it have less mistakes, but it also gives you greater control over what exactly you're doing and making sure that your data does what you want your data to do.
So which one's easier, the data sheet or the design view?
Design view. Absolutely design view. Now, could I do all of these things in the data sheet view? Absolutely. Here's how I could do that. So don't do this. But if I go on, say, last name, in the last name, if I click on the fields, it says field size of 15. And if I go to first name, it says field size of 15. If I go to street, it says field size of 20. And if I go to city, 20. And if I go to state, 2. And if I go to postal code, 5. And if I go to start date, it says this is a data type of date and time. And if I had wanted to change it, I could have changed it and stuff. The other thing is that over here, I can choose to mark things as required or unique and so on. If I go to BR, it is unique and it's indexed because this is the primary key. So again, can I do it using the method that the book tells you to do it? Absolutely. Do I think it's the right way? Absolutely not. Which is why I strongly advise people not to read the book before doing this stuff, because I don't think that the book shows you the best way of doing it. Anyway, all right. So now what they want us to do is they want us to actually go into the design view. So we're going to go back to the design view, or if you're already in the design view, just stay in the design view. And when we are in the design view, let's see here. We've already changed, I think we've actually already changed most of the things that they wanted us to change. In fact, I think we've changed them all. Yeah, we did change them all. So we've already done all of the things that they wanted us to do. So actually we can go back to the data sheet view, and we can actually start entering in records into our table. Question? Yes.
Yeah, for the postal code, why is it short text? Postal code, isn't it number?
It could be a number, but short text can be used for both numbers and for text. And so, yes, you could use postal code. You could do it as a number. But then the problem with doing it as a number is that it would treat it as a number. And so why would that be a problem? Well, it's conceivable that that if you put in, let's say for example, you put in not the 5-digit postal code, but rather the 9-digit postal code, right? So let's say, yeah, it's the one with the hyphen. So let's say I do the 9-digit one. So so we do like
95128.
95128,
Last 4 numbers.
and then 1 2 3 4. Okay. Now suppose we do this as text. If we do this as text, it is 95128-1234. If we do that as number, what the computer will think you meant was 95128 minus 1234, and it will record 93894. Because it will treat the hyphen not as a hyphen, but rather as a minus sign. And it will say, because this is a number, we're taking this number, subtracting that number, and we're putting this number in. So one of the ways that you can avoid that potentially bad thing from happening is to make this be a text field instead of a number field. Now, another way to do it is to make it so that there are actually 2 fields. One field being the 5-digit code and another field being the optional 4-digit suffix. That might be another way of doing it. Similarly, let's say you're doing phone numbers and you don't do you want to do phone numbers as, say, a number. So we've got 408-555-1212. So if we do that, that's no problem. But what if we do 408-555-1212?
Minus.
It's entirely possible, and in fact, likely, that the computer will think you meant 408 minus 555 minus 1212, and it says, oh, you mean minus 1359,
Oh,
which you probably don't mean to do. Now, again, does that mean you can't use number? No, you can use number. However, you need to realize that if you use number, one of the potentially bad things that might happen is that it might actually do calculations when you don't intend for it to do calculations. And that's why text is usually the best choice for a database. Almost everything I do as text. Now, whether I do it as short text or long text depends on how much data I'm actually trying to capture. For almost everything, it would be short text. When would I do long text? I would do long text for something like, let's say I am creating I'm doing a email database, and I want to capture all of the emails that have been sent. Why would I want to do that? Because my name is Gmail. When you go to Gmail, do you only see the email that you just now wrote, or do you see all of the email that you've gotten in the last, X number of days? You see all of the email. How do you see all of the email? Because it's stored in a database. And your program is making a call to the database, and it is pulling and displaying that data. Well, in the to field, that would be short text. The from field, short text. Subject, short text. Date, probably date field. But like the email message itself would probably be long text, because you're probably going to write more than 250 words, or 250 letters, I mean. So that's why long text would be an example of what you might do. That's where you might use long text. The problem with using long text is that it takes up more space, and so that means that it takes longer for it to load, and there are issues with using long text.
what is the format for the date and time?
The date and time will be the date and time. So if I click onto this start date, for example, it brings up the calendar, and then when I pick a date, it will do it with the date. So let's actually go ahead and do that.
General or long date?
What are you doing now, sir?
So page 20.
All right.
So on page 20, I want to enter some records into using the table method of entering data into the database.
The table method?
Right, because remember from last time, you can enter in data using the table view, or you can enter in data using forms. Well, we haven't created a form, so you can't do it in forms yet, but that would be the other way. It would be to use forms.
No, I mean in the design view, when you do the format for the start date, is it going to be long date or?
When you do date and time, the format, I'm just using the default. And the default is actually the general, I believe. But if you just leave it blank, it will do what we want it to do.
Oh, okay.
All right, so in the BR, the records, the first record, this is on page 20, we want to put in record 53. And record 53 is Robert Chin. So we do Chin and Robert is at what, 265 Maxwell? And he's in Gossett, Pennsylvania, and 19157, and his start date is 6/1/2013. So I go back to 2013, or I could actually just type it in. and his salary is 26,250, and his bonus rate is 0.19. Oops, 0.119. And then the next record is record number 42, and it is Melina Perez. By the way, those of you who are not cackling with laughter right at the moment, the number 42 is a very special number. If you go to Google and you say, what is the answer to life, the universe, and everything, you will discover that it is 42. It's from The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, which is a very funny book written by Douglas Adams. And it's an inside joke that many, if not most, techies like to do. And so 42 tends to be the number that is used for examples. Another number that's really funny is 24, because it's the opposite of 42. Another really funny thing is February 4th and April 2nd. Those are both 42. So 42. 42 is quite amusing and funny. So now you're in on the joke. So the next time that you do something,
How do you undo something right here on this?
you cannot undo anything. The way that you can't undo something, which means that the only way to undo something is to redo it.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know what the heck I just did right here, but after going on Perez, I hit something.
I
don't
have
know what
no
the hell.
idea.
I already hit
So
Chin,
if we
Robert.
go on view and you go back to your data sheet view, to your design view, data sheet view. It's there.
Okay, all right. I don't know what I just did. Thanks.
Yep. All right, so Melina Perez is at what, 261 Porter Drive in Adelphia, Pennsylvania, and 19156 and 5/14/2012 and 31,500 and 0.2.
So Brandon, I'm having trouble to go back to database view.
To change your views, you just want to click on the view, and then
Yeah, I did.
if you're in design view, you're in design view. If you go back to view and then click on to datasheet view, it'll go back to datasheet view.
Yes, I'm trying, and every time it says you must first save the table.
Right, you have to save the tables.
I did, and it keeps on showing me the same dialog box.
So then it means that it sounds like you're trying to, that you started to make a modification on something, and you have to complete whatever that modification is. All right, so the next thing that we want to do is we want to add some more records to our database. And to add more records to our database, this is, we're skipping all the way now to page 26. And on page 26, there are a couple of things that I wanted to point out, and that is down here at the bottom, it shows you where all of your records are. So right now we have 2 records. So I can use the go forward and go backwards, the next record and previous record to show you the next record and previous records and stuff. If I want to create a new record, several options. The simplest really is just to hit tab to go to the next line, but you can also click on home, you can click on to new records. Question? you can't put- Because you have to put in you must put in a record, you have to put in the number for the VR number because you can't, because this can't be blank. So click OK. Put in the VR number. You have to type in the VR number because again, if a field is required and you try to go to create a new record and you haven't yet put in the required field, it won't let you do that because you said it's required. And how did we say it was required? When we said that it is a primary key. Primary keys are required. So if any field that you mark as required, whether you actually mark it as required or whether you mark it as required by making it a primary key, the database will not allow you to go to the next record until you type in something in that required field, because it's a required field.
What page are we on now, sir?
Page 26. Really 27. So what they want us to do is they want us to add the next set of records. So they want us to put in record 65. And record 65 is Tracy Rogers. So Rogers, Tracy, and she's at 1827 Maple Avenue. And she's at Adelphia, Pennsylvania. And she's on, let's see, she is 19159. And her start date was 7/1/2014 and 7,750 and 18%. And then the last one is record number 48. And record number 48 is Statnik. Statnik.
Where do you see these on the page? 27?
Page 29 is the easiest way of reading it.
All right.
Michael, and he's at 3135 Simpson Drive in Pleasantburg, New Jersey. 07025 11513 and 29,000 and 20%. So one of the things that you can do in Access is just like you can do in Excel, and that is you can auto fit your content. So to change and fit your content, you can click and drag it in order to make it fit. You can also put it in between the two and double click, and it will auto fit. And if you want to do them all at once, you can select them all at once and then do a double click, and it will resize them to fit.
STATNIK.
Yes, STATNIK. All right. So at this point, the next thing that we want to do is we want to quit out of Vivant altogether. So after you've entered in the data for the book rep table, what we are going to be doing is we are going to be importing into our table, into our database, a new table. So right now we have our book rep table. What we're going to do is we're going to get the customer data table. So where are we going to get the customer data table? The customer data table is actually in Canvas. So in Canvas, if we go to assignments, and we go to Access Chapter 1, Part 2, Vivant, there is a link that says on page 33, you will be asked to import the customer data from this Excel spreadsheet. And that is exactly what we are doing. So to do this, the first thing I want to do is I want to download my customer data. So I'm just going to single click on my customer data.xls X file, and that will download it. So I will download it and I will save it. I'll just save it into my documents. So now I've got my database, my data saved. So I've saved it into my documents. So I'm going to go back then to my Access. And when I'm back in my Access, what I want to do is I want to import the Excel worksheet. And again, this is on page 32 to 33. So on page 33, we're going to now import the Excel spreadsheet into this database. And to import it into this database, we need to go on external data. So we click on external data, and on external data, we are importing from Excel. So importing from Excel. And when we import from Excel, it says, great, where are we getting it from? Well, the place that we are getting it from is wherever we saved the spreadsheet. So if you saved it to your downloads, it's going to be in your downloads. If you saved it into your desktop, it's going to be on your desktop. If you saved it into your documents, it's going to be in your documents. So in my case, I saved it into my documents. So I click on a browse, and on browse, I look for the file called customerdata.xls. And I click on import, or I click on open rather. And there are several options. The option that we want to do is we want to import the source data into a new table in the current database. That is exactly the default, and that's exactly what we want to do. Question?
Sorry, can we save it to the memory stick?
Yeah, you can save it to your memory stick, sure.
Just right now.
Sure.
The name of the file is
Customer data. You shouldn't type it in. It's already typed in.
no, because the name is Humayun Document Publication.
No, the name of it is customer data.
The name of the file.
The Excel spreadsheet.
The Excel spreadsheet is named customer data.
No, I'm going to save the access things that we did before.
Well, we did that 30 minutes ago.
No, he's asking the work that we just did. Can he save the whole entire
Yeah.
Access database to his
To his thumb drive.
his-
Yes, absolutely. And that's why I said that's what we did 30 minutes ago. 30 minutes ago, the very first thing that I did was I created a new database and I saved it. And the place that I saved it, in my case, was on my documents. In your case, you could have saved it and should have saved it on your thumb drive.
The name is customer.
No, the name of it, the name of the file is your
first
name,
your last name.
Vivant Publishing. But the name of the Excel spreadsheet is customer data. Okay, so we are going to import the customer data into the current database. The other options we are not going to do, but I'm going to tell you about them. One is that you could append a copy of the records to an existing table. So the existing table would be the book rep table, because we already have a book rep table in there. We could append the data to that table. Another option would be to link it using a linked table. Generally speaking, I recommend against doing that. The problem with doing a linking a data source to creating a linked table. So if you're trying to say something, stop and just pay attention to what I'm talking about. We're going to take a break momentarily, and you can catch up at that point. Okay. Link to the data source by creating a linked table. What this will do is this will automatically make a link to the data in Excel. And the problem with doing this is twofold. It's also its advantage. Any changes that you make in Excel would automatically change in Access, and any changes you made in Access would automatically change in Excel. That's both the benefit and the problem with them. Because if you have, say, if you do link it using a linked table and you have Excel open with that Excel spreadsheet, that can cause a conflict with your computer accessing the information, because you can't access it and write to two places at the exact same time. And so that can cause problems. I generally don't recommend linking it directly. I usually recommend copying it. And that's what the top two choices are, is that it's copying the data. The problem, though, with copying the data is now you have two data points. One data point that's in your Access database and one data point that is in your Excel spreadsheet. And so you just need to be aware that that's what's going on. Question?
So I had to go to, I had to keep this open, go to Canvas and go to that customer.
Correct.
Before I even did, I did this, right?
Yes. That's why I said we're going to take a break momentarily, and I can help you catch up to where we're at.
Yeah, maybe I can help after this guy. I'll run down and do my secret real quick.
All right. So I want to import the source data into a new table. So I click on OK. And the first thing that it's going to tell me is it's going to say, I noticed that there are column headings. Do I want to use those? And the answer in this case is yes. Yes, I do. So the first row contains column headings. I want to keep that that box checked, and it shows you what the data are. So it shows you what the data are so that you can look at it and say, yeah, that looks right. And I can scroll to see the whole data. I can scroll this way to see the data this way. So I can look and make sure that this is the right spreadsheet that I'm supposed to be importing. So I click on the next because it is. And then it says, okay, what fields from the spreadsheet do you want to be the fields in Access? And by default, the name in the spreadsheet will be the same as the name in Access. If you want to change that, this would be where you would change that. Now, in this case, I don't want to change that because I want it to be customer number. I want it to be short text. I don't want it to be indexed, and so on. So it will allow me, it gives you the option to make changes. But in this case, I don't actually want to do that. And the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to click on to next. And it's going to say, what about the primary key? Because every table that is in a that's in a relational database needs to have a primary key. And because we're having two tables, that makes this into a relational database. Because a flat file database only has one table. So a flat file database has one table, relational databases have two or more tables. So we need to have a primary key, and we already have a primary key. So we don't need to use, we don't want access to choose or to create a primary key for us. We want to use our own primary key, and the primary key is going to be the customer number. So for this data, for this table, the customer number is the unique identifier for the data, for that record. So I'm doing choose my own primary key, customer number. This is on page 35. And then on 36, I'm going to click on the next. And it's going to say, do I want to import this to the table, and I want to name this whatever I want to name this table. So I mentioned this before, but I'll mention it again. I usually recommend that you put in the word table for tables, and that you put in the word form for forms, and that you put in the word query for queries, and so on. Report for reports. And the reason I recommend that you do that is that it makes it easier to read, I think, when you're putting it in. So by default, it's just going to say customer data, but I'm going to say customer data table. And it gives you an option to analyze the data. I would recommend against doing that. The other thing I would strongly recommend against doing is saving the import steps. So on page 36, they talk about saving the import steps. I recommend that you never tick that box. And the reason that I don't think it's a good idea to save the import steps is that it will save the import steps, which means the next time you import something, unless you want to import it exactly the same way that you imported this, you don't want to save it because you want to give yourself the option to be able to import it differently. Perhaps in the next table or the next data set that you want to import in, you don't want to have a primary key chosen from existing stuff, and you do want access to generate the primary key for you. Well, if you've checked the box that says save the steps, and in the steps you said use my own key, well then it's going to remember that and it's going to do that. So I think it's a bad choice. So I would advise you not to do what the book says to do on steps 7 and 8, and instead skip straight to save step 9, which is to enter in the data and click on to finish, and not click on to the save the import steps. And so what we've now generated is we've generated the book rep table and the customer data table. And if I want to view the customer data table, I can double click it and it will show me the customer data. And the customer data are the data that were in the Excel spreadsheet. And in the data sheet view in a database looks almost exactly the same as a spreadsheet does in a spreadsheet program. But they are not the same thing. They are similar, they're related, but they are not the same thing. If I want to make any modifications, I need to close it. So to close it, I would need to click close to make my change. So for example, let's say I don't want it to be called the customer data table, and instead I want it to be called the Fubi Fufu table. If I want to rename it, I right click and I say rename. It will say you can't rename it because it's open. So that means that I need to close it first. Now that I've closed it, I can right click and rename it, and I can call it the Fubi Fufu table. And now it's the Fubi Fufu table. And if I want to revert it back to being the customer data table, I can rename it the customer data table. And it will allow me to do that. The point is that if you want to rename something or you want to delete something, you have to close it first and then you can modify it.
How do you close it?
You close it by clicking on the little X on the far right. So if I want to modify the book rep table, I have to close the book rep table in order to modify the book rep table. All right. I think that's enough for the moment. It is what, 7:30? Let's take about a 15-20 minute break. When we come back from the break, we will continue on with modifying our table. We are on page 37, so that'll be where we come back to when we come back. Like I said, let's go ahead and take about a 20-minute break and come back around 7:50. And I'll come around and help anybody that needs any assistance.